Chapter 1E. Governments are yet another big actor in the finance sector. They evolved primarily to protect the interests of their citizens and fulfill their electoral mandate. And as far as the world of finance is concerned, that means taking action to maintain a healthy economy. So let's see how the UK government interacts with the economy as a whole. The first way it does that is through taxation. Let's use some common sense. If the government perceives lower taxes, you have more money disposable out of every paycheck, and therefore you can buy a house faster, refresh your tech, buy new clothes, travel, and etc. While companies at the same time can invest in new machinery, hire a new person, or expand an existing department. Now, what happens if the government perceives higher taxes? Overall, individuals have less money to spend and save, while businesses have less to invest. These are symptoms of a slowing down economy. The level of taxation, therefore, has a profound impact on the economy as a whole. So why does government tax its citizens at all? The first reason is to generate revenue because governments don't have any money of their own. But at the same time, they have obligations like policing, health, education. And the second reason is to maintain social order and well-being. Occasionally, depending on which party is in charge, governments can decide to redistribute wealth and better welfare systems or even boost the national health services. Taxation doesn't always mean government taking money from you. In some cases, governments can influence what you do with your money through a different kind of taxation. An example would be to encourage people to save and invest more. Governments can offer tax concessions on various kinds of accounts like ISAs, pensions, and NS&I products. And so, by granting preferential tax treatment to some accounts over others, governments can effectively dictate how popular some products get. For instance, premium bonds in the UK are held by a staggering 22 million people. That's nearly the third of the population. Another example of tax concession would be the abolition of first-time buyers' property tax up to £300,000. Since there is less tax to pay, it became cheaper to buy a first house, effectively increasing the number of people who got on the property ladder. Focus point. We can clearly see the link between different tax rates and their influence on people and businesses' behaviors, whether you consume or you save, the behavior of future you and me, the advisors who will recommend products over others, and the economic activity as a whole. The second role of the government which directly affects the finance world is to set economic policy. An economic policy is essentially two items that the government can manipulate in order to steer the economy in whichever direction it wants. The first tool is the fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is concerned with the control of taxation, borrowing, and government spending. These are decided by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak currently. If you followed the news recently during the COVID crisis of 2020, you will have seen that the Chancellor informed the public that the government will borrow billions of pounds to solve the crisis, and he also delineated the different ways that he was gonna spend it, by sending new checks, by paying 80% of the salaries, by giving loans to businesses. The second tool is the monetary policy. This is concerned with money supply and interest rates. So money supply is how much money is circulating in the economy, and interest rates are the price or the cost of borrowing. This kind of policy is determined by the MPC, the Monetary Policy Committee, which is also a branch of the Bank of England. Focus point. Here's how I like to think of fiscal policy and monetary policy. Fiscal policy I look at as a big equation with two sides, money and spending. The way you raise money is via taxes and borrowing, and then you can spend the money you raised. If the tax revenue is lower than your spending commitments, then you need to borrow. This is what's called running a budget deficit. When it comes to monetary policy, I like to think of it as a lever of some sort. You either increase the circulation of money in the economy or you decrease it. Either you raise the interest rates or you drop them, like the Bank of England has done recently to tackle the crisis. We said fiscal policy deals with taxes, spending, but also borrowing. The UK government borrows by issuing financial instruments such as gilts. The Debt Management Office, DMO, which is part of the Treasury, creates these gilts, which are sold to the public, companies and institutions. What effectively happens when the government issues bonds is they take the money out of circulation and thereby lowering its quantity. As we said earlier, less money around, less consumption, less investments, and subsequently we have an economic slowdown. And when the government pays back its debt by repurchasing the bonds from you, they effectively put money back in the hands of people who bought the bonds previously, and that increases the money supply. And as we said earlier, more money, more consumption, more spending, more investment, and we have an economic expansion. Now then, during extraordinary times like financial crises, the government can resort to a different kind of spending that is quite unusual. It is called quantitative easing, or QE for short. This is a government spending on a massive scale. It broadly involves the Bank of England buying back the gilts that the government issued in order to inject liquidity into the system. And that has the side effect of stabilizing financial sectors, which can suffer from a lack of liquidity during hard times. Moving to the monetary policy for a second. The Bank of England has used the gilt repo market to influence its short-term interest rate. Repo is not short for repossession like I foolishly thought the first time I heard the term. It is short for sale and repurchase agreement. A repo therefore is a short-term, usually overnight, loan in exchange for gilts or collateral that can be repurchased the next day for a slightly higher price. The implied rate that results from the difference between the sale and the repurchase price is called the repo rate. Quick example, you're after £100 urgently, but all you have is a government bond that you wish not to liquidate. So what you do is come and enter into an agreement with me, whereby I take your bond to keep in my vaults and loan you the £100 you're after. The next morning, when you come back to recuperate your bond, we agree a repurchase price of £101. The interest rate I charged you is 1% in this case. Or in other words, the implied rate of when we subtract the repurchase price of 101 from the sale price of 100, and that is the repo rate. Focus point. The MPC, Monetary Policy Committee, is independent and does not take orders from the Prime Minister or anyone else. It is made of 9 members so that we can never have a tie in any vote, and the decisions are taken for the greater good of the economy rather than political expediency. And the last role the government plays in the economy is to provide welfare and benefits provisions. The NHS, disability benefits, unemployment benefits, state pensions. All of these have one thing in common. Any UK citizen or legal resident has access to these when needed, provided they meet the requirements. So for me and you, these things come for free. But to the provider, the government in this case, it is a bill they need to foot. Imagine for a second if we didn't have all these benefits. We would definitely need to spend more for private insurances, pensions, healthcare. We all agree on the necessity and the utility of a welfare provision in a state. What we disagree on, however, is how to fund them. Do we increase tax? We pay too much tax already. Do we print money out of thin air? What about inflation? Do we borrow it from somewhere else? Oh, we have enough debt already. And as if all of this weren't enough, there's increasingly more evidence that tells us we're headed towards a pension crisis. We have an aging population in the UK, with fewer young people working to support their pensions. Current workers pay retirees' pensions. Tomorrow's retirees will be looked after by the future generation of workers' taxes. So if less people support more people, we will either need to increase the retirement age, so there's less people to support at any given time, or increase the taxes on the very few. When you combine these grim realities with an underfunded NHS and occasional economic crisis that push many people out of work, we quickly realize that we really ought to not rely solely on the welfare system to meet our current and future needs. Focus point. Private insurance and pension provisions must be made as early as possible. An example of the government pointing people in the right direction is NEST, National Employment Savings Trust. Most working people in the UK are automatically enrolled into this scheme in order to start saving for their pension as early as possible to reduce the load on public funds. So this marks the end of chapter 1. If you look at the description, you will find the general table of contents, the chapter's table of contents, time-stamped components of the chapter, so you can navigate it faster, and also the notes from the entire chapter. Should you have any more questions or have any feedback, drop it in the comments section below, or send me an email to the address I've provided.